When Michael Jackson performed, the world seemed to stop. Stadiums were packed. Fans were captivated by his voice. The album Thriller alone sold more copies than any other. And his influence, you can see it in every pop star who has stepped onto the stage since then. But Michael wasn't perfect. He was criticized for his live singing, his less-than-perfect acting skills, and, while not his fault, he was suspected of having fake songs on albums released posthumously. In August 2022, would you believe that was really Michael's voice? If I told you right now, I could say no. Michael clearly became the king of pop, but the journey to that was much darker and more complex than most people realize. He faced rejection, doubt, and struggled to prove himself time and time again. So, how good was Michael Jackson really? In 1968, a boy from Gary, Indiana, walked into Motown Records. He sang better than the adult men who had been doing this for decades. That boy was Michael Jackson. You see, the Jackson 5 wasn't just an ordinary children's band. They were something completely different. Berry Gordy, the founder of Motown, said he had never seen anything like it. What was your first impression of the Jackson family performing? Leave your thoughts in the comments, like and subscribe to our channel to support us. How did you feel the first time you met the Jackson family, when Michael Jackson walked in? What was your initial impression of watching them perform in front of you? I was completely overwhelmed. Watching them perform, I was utterly captivated. Diana Ross introduced him to America on the Hollywood Palace Show in 1969. And Michael, the little boy with the afro hair bigger than his body, held the microphone as if he'd been performing for 50 years. But what people don't often realize is that while other kids were learning multiplication tables, Michael was learning dance. While they were playing tag during recess, he was in the studio until 3 a.m. In fact, he was becoming a stage addict. I really was. Like, even on days off and when there were no shows, I would still stay up late to dance. It was strange. I guess I was an addict, uncontrollable. Joe Jackson didn't believe in childhood. He only believed in perfection. He achieved that through this whip. Or if you're black, you're probably familiar with rattan canes. Michael later said he was so terrified of his father that he felt nauseous just seeing him appear. Think about it. A child so afraid of his father that he gets sick. But that same child would step onto the stage and command thousands of spectators. By 1970, the Jackson 5 had 4 consecutive #1 singles: I Want You Back, ABC, The Love You Save, I'll Be There. No band had ever done that before. 11-year-old Michael sang about love and heartbreak in a way that made adult women cry. But the problem was, things got complicated, because that success came at a high price. Do you think Joe Jackson's parenting style was too harsh? Please share your thoughts, like, and subscribe to the channel. Every interview, every photo shoot, Berry Gordy's team would always remind him, you're not kids, you're professionals. Michael couldn't make friends with people his own age. He couldn't go to school dances. He could barely go outside without causing a commotion. He would later talk about staring out the hotel window, watching children play in the park. Just standing there, watching. Michael just wanted to be normal. But the problem was, he wasn't normal. You see, he wasn't just talented. He was completely obsessed with music. Who did you start listening to shape your singing style? James Brown. I chose James Brown and Sammy Davis Jr. because I liked what they did, the kind of energetic music. What did you learn from him? Yes, I did most of his dance moves on stage. And I just loved the way Sammy sang. The music was amazing, but behind every perfect performance was a child who had been beaten for missing a step. Behind every smile was a child who didn't know what it was like to live a real childhood. By 1979, Michael was 21 and eager to prove something. The Jackson 5 had left Motown and become the Jacksons. But Michael, he wanted more than that. He needed more than that. I'm James Phillips. I want to know how it felt to stand up there alone. And did he plan on appearing solo? No, I'm only doing this because these are solo songs for my album. And they included them in the band's album. At this point, Quincy Jones came along, who had worked with everyone from Frank Sinatra to Count Basie. When Quincy agreed to produce a solo album for Michael, everyone thought it was strange. A jazz legend working with a former child star to create pop and disco music? But it was a perfect match. Quincy Jones and Mike also worked together on the film The Wiz, and a year later, they released Off the Wall. Don't Stop Till You Get Enough is still played in movies and social events. The album achieved 4-time platinum certification, a part that nobody really mentions. Despite selling millions of copies and having 4 top 10 singles, the album only received 2 Grammy nominations, and only one. Michael sat in that ceremony, watching other artists win awards he knew he deserved, and then something inside him exploded. He told his lawyer that night, "My next album will be the biggest album of all time." Most people would call him crazy, a 21-year-old saying he would create the greatest album in history. Yes, he was Michael Jackson, but he wasn't the king yet. Michael had been competing with adults since he was 5 years old. He understood that talent wasn't enough. You needed to be undeniable. In fact, Off the Wall should have been enough. It revolutionized pop music. It made disco music more sophisticated. But the industry still saw him as Little Michael, still a pupil of Diana Ross, just another member of the Jackson family. November 29th, 1982, the day the music industry changed forever. Thriller wasn't destined to happen that way. CBS executives wanted another Off the Wall, a safe, successful, and profitable album. But Michael and Quincy had other plans. They wanted to create an album where every song could be a single. Every track had to be perfect. But let me tell you about MTV first, because you can't understand the impact of Thriller without that. MTV launched in 1981 as a music television channel. They had a very specific format, primarily rock music. They felt Michael wasn't a good fit for their audience. When Billie Jean came out, everyone knew it was a hit. But MTV remained unconvinced. That is, until CBS Records president Walter Yetnikoff threatened to remove all CBS artists from their playlists until they played Michael Jackson's music. And when they did, Billie Jean became one of the most requested videos. It opened doors not only for Michael, but for countless artists who followed. But Michael didn't stop there. It was Motown's 25th anniversary, and Michael was scheduled to perform with his brothers. He did, but then requested a solo performance. He walked out in a fedora like this, a black jacket, silver gloves, the Billie Jean melody playing, and you know what happened. But Michael still didn't stop changing history. With the Thriller video, he turned it into a 14-minute short film that cost $500,000. Before Thriller, music videos were basically recorded live performances. They might have a few simple effects, but after Thriller, videos essentially became mini-movies. Artists started hiring film directors. Budgets exploded. Storylines were invested in. We still see that today. It all became the standard thanks to Michael. He fundamentally changed the meaning of making a music video. The Thriller album almost destroyed every record that existed. The best-selling album of 1983, 1984, and of all time. We're talking 70 million copies, 7 top 10 singles, 8 Grammys in one night. Who contributed more, Michael Jackson or Quincy Jones? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. But success is always complicated, because now everyone wants a piece of Michael Jackson. The Pepsi commercial went wrong. His hair caught fire in a staged technical explosion. That's when the painkiller thing started. Then he faced backlash for commercial success. Black radio stations started saying he had abandoned his community. Rock critics said he was too commercial. Those who had ignored him during Off the Wall were now saying he was too much of a showman. And all of this was just the beginning of what would eventually become his Achilles heel: the media. Fast forward. Michael spent 3 years preparing for his next album. The pressure after Thriller must have been tremendous. Imagine having to surpass an icon. What would you write next? Bad is the answer. 5 number-1 singles from one album. The Bad Tour became the highest-grossing tour in history. But there was another discussion going on. Prince. While Michael broke sales records, Prince broke musical boundaries. Purple Rain, Sign of the Times. Critics liked to pit them against each other. Michael was pop, and Prince was art. Michael knew how to dance, but Prince played many instruments. Michael really wanted to collaborate with Prince. He offered him a duet on Bad. But when Prince heard the song, he heard the first line and disagreed. The first line in that song was, "Your ass is mine." I asked, "Who's going to sing that to whom? Because surely you're not singing to me, and I'm not singing to you." So, right from that, we saw there was a problem. In reality, this animosity wasn't real. Not really. They respected each other. But the media always needed a story, and unfortunately, Michael became their prime target. The press discovered they could sell more magazines by calling him Wacko Jacko instead of celebrating his music. Everything weird he did became headline news. He bought a chimpanzee, front page news. He slept in a hyperbaric oxygen chamber, which wasn't actually the case. But who cared about the truth? The headlines lasted for weeks. And then they got the biggest story. I have a skin condition that destroys skin pigmentation, something I can't control. But when people fabricate stories that I don't want to be myself, it hurts me. Michael was falsely accused of having vitiligo, a disease that destroys pigment cells. That's what defined him, in both positive and negative ways. But instead of compassion, he received ridicule. When the album Dangerous came out, Michael continued to break boundaries. New Jack Swing with Teddy Riley, Industrial Sounds, Black or White became the most watched television event of 1991. But stories about Wacko Jacko continued to surface. Stories about him trying to buy the bones of the Elephant Man. About him lying in an oxygen tank. The stories became increasingly ridiculous. But some people started to believe them. At least, it began to shape his image. Ironically, while some called him an eccentric, he was still revolutionizing music. The dance moves he created in that era are still copied today. Look at any K-pop group, that's Michael. But he made a grave mistake. Michael was kind and trusting, but perhaps too trusting. He owned his own amusement park and often allowed children and their families to stay there. He never had a childhood, so he wanted to make up for it. But in 1993, everything fell apart. In August 1993, Michael Jackson was accused of child abuse. This had been a sensitive topic surrounding Michael Jackson for a long time. But we have to talk about what it did to him, because whether you believe him innocent or guilty, what happened next was essentially a public execution. The accusations surfaced during the Dangerous tour. Michael was performing in packed stadiums when police raided his home. The media onslaught was relentless. It was so bad that he had to cancel the tour. He became dependent on painkillers just to stay active. The case was eventually settled out of court, but the damage was permanent. Next, the album History was released. It consisted of half old hits and half new material. And the new songs were more angry and defiant. They don't care about us, Scream, Stranger in Moscow. This was no longer the Michael who sang The Way You Make Me Feel. This was a wounded and scratched man. Of course, because it was Michael, the album and tour were still successful. But you could see something was broken that couldn't really be mended. The accusations came back in 2003. Then came the trial. He was acquitted of all charges, but acquittal doesn't necessarily mean vindication in the public eye. By this point, Michael had proven himself to be one of the greatest. But he still hadn't surpassed the success of Thriller, and his career began to show signs of decline. So he wanted to try to surpass himself one last time. But he had another enemy to fight: Sony Music Entertainment. In 2001, Michael released Invincible, his final studio album. Sony barely promoted it. They were in a battle with Michael over original rights and money, but it still debuted at #1 and went double platinum. It was a failure for MichaelJackson, but still a success most other artists would envy. But the machine was slowly breaking down, and debts were piling up. Not because he wasn't making money. Michael had a lot of assets. But the lawsuits never stopped, and everything seemed to be piling up on him. So Michael wanted one last glimmer of hope. In 2009, he announced the This Is It tour. 50 concerts at the O2 Arena in London. Tickets sold out in hours. He was 50 years old, training as if he were 25. Footage from his training sessions showed he was still captivating, still possessed that magic that made all the difference. But he was also very fragile. He couldn't sleep without medication and weighed only about 130 pounds. And on June 25, 2009, the King of Pop was pronounced dead at UCLA Medical Center. According to the Los Angeles Times, pop star Michael Jackson passed away this afternoon. Both the Los Angeles Times and CBS News are now reporting that Michael Jackson has passed away. His death is painful and, according to some, remains a mystery. But on the positive side, his legacy is still felt, not only by the music industry, but by all of us. So how good was Michael Jackson really? The numbers are untouchable. Over 1 billion records sold, 13 Grammy Awards, 39 Guinness World Records. Thriller alone has sold more than the combined careers of most artists. But the numbers don't tell the whole story. Not quite. Look at Beyoncé performing. That's Michael. Look at Bruno Mars. Michael. The Weeknd, Justin Timberlake, Usher, Chris Brown, they're all trying to emulate what he has. Even K-pop groups, like BTS, are stepping through the doors Michael opened. He changed the meaning of a pop star. Before Michael, stars just sang songs, but then they created entire worlds around albums and different eras. Music videos weren't just promotional tools. They became art. He changed the game for concerts. He even changed the entire face of MTV. A black boy from Gary, Indiana, became the biggest star on the planet. He created music that transcended language, race, culture, everything. Was he perfect? Of course not. He wasn't as good at playing instruments as Prince, and in live performances, his voice was strained and not as good as in recordings. But Michael's influence was far greater than the music itself. Michael Jackson had his childhood stolen, his appearance mocked, his reputation ruined, and his every action criticized. He never had that comeback, never had that final victory where the whole world celebrated him. But perhaps that only made his greatness even more remarkable. He never stopped trying to give his all to heal the world through music. At his concerts, hundreds of people in the audience would shout, "Michael, Michael!" How did he feel? When everyone held hands and everyone swayed, people of all skin colors, all.
There are hundreds of people in the audience yelling, Michael, Michael. What do you feel?
Now, Michael is so good that 15 years after his death, pop stars are still chasing what he achieved. I have a video about how every modern artist, maybe your favorite artist, is still copying Michael Jackson. Watch the next video on the screen, and I'll see you there. Until next time, goodbye.